Hello, James Moffitt here. Please go to parentingadultchildren.org website and sign up for a free membership and leave a review for this episode. If you have any requests for future topics, send me an email at talkpac@proton.me. That's talkpac@proton.me. Please share this podcast with your friends and family. Now for today's guest interview.
Welcome to the podcast ABCs of Parenting Adult Children. Please join us as we discuss parenting adult children and the unique struggles that it comes along with.
Hello and welcome to ABCs of Parenting Adult Children podcast. My name is James Moffitt. I will be your host. Today we have Dr. David Marcus. He's a returning guest. And Dr. Marcus, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Go ahead and introduce yourself again to our listening audience.
Sure. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I've been in practice for 40 years, specializing in families under stress. And I've done a lot of legal work as such, as custody work, high conflict divorce cases, things like that. And most of what I'm going to talk about today, I've learned primarily from the children that I've seen, which has been hundreds over the years, of course. And what I wanted to share with people was the basis of emotional communication with children. But also, there's a process called emptying out that I want to describe to your listeners, especially the parents who are listening. All right. So, and there's a concept also called a soothing presence, which is probably what I'll start with because that's pretty quick.
Okay. Well, feel free to just go ahead and launch into it.
Okay. Any questions, just please interrupt me. All right.
All right. Will do.
A soothing presence. What do I mean by that? Well, a soothing presence is basically somebody who's okay when you're not okay. When we think about people that we turn to when we are upset, it's usually specific people, friends or family. And invariably, those specific people are okay when we are not. And I use the term, well, I'll give you the example. When, if you're upset about something and you go and talk to somebody, and instead of listening, they say, oh, look, I've been through that and this is what you should do. If it was a good friend, you'd say to them, just hear me out. This is the introduction to the emptying out process. If it wasn't a good friend, you'd say, thank you, and go find a good friend. These are special people in our life, and we all know who they are. And I use the term soothing presence as opposed to soothing parent because the parent is trying to create a soothing environment. Okay, spouses are trying to create a soothing environment for their children and for each other, and that gets into lifestyle, which we're not going to talk about too much. But if we're all under stress, which a lot of us are, that's why I specialize in families under stress. It's very hard to be a soothing presence. So one of the things I have to talk to parents about is lifestyle. And so I'm not going to get into the sociology of two-income families and how stressed people are these days, but this is that's why I use the term soothing presence, because you can't just say, oh, just do this and you'll be a soothing presence, because you can't do it if you're all head up about something. So bearing that in mind, we're assuming that the person is a soothing presence and the other person is upset and they need to be emptied out. Now, I need to explain the term filled up so that you understand the term emptying out. And okay, what do I mean? Well, this is how I explain it. We all have an emotional space within us. And when we think about this, we sometimes point to our chest, like our heart, But obviously it's, associations in our brain. And this emotional space, it's a psychological space, gets filled up with intense emotion, anger, anxiety, fear, frustration. In fact, in little children, it can be even intense glee at getting the littlest toy. The point I'm trying to make is, when we're filled up, what happens to us? Well, it's uncomfortable. We feel its intensity. We feel it's like we're not in control of our emotions sometimes. Sometimes we wonder how come we're feeling that way. So what do? We focus inwardly on how we're feeling and try to deal with it. And we have lots of ways of dealing with it. We may journal. We may talk to somebody. We may go for a run. We may watch TV and distract ourselves. The point I'm trying to make is that we're focused inwardly on how we feel, trying to deal with it, trying to deal with the intensity of it. So by definition, we are not focused outwardly on what people are telling us. The best example I can give you is if you ever heard the term a blinding rage. A blinding rage. Well, that's a very descriptive term. And the reason it's descriptive is because when people are so filled up with anger, they're literally blind to whatever you're saying. And, you can give the most logical explanation to somebody who's in a rage about, why they shouldn't feel that way and this is okay and everything is, they won't hear it. They'll hear that 5% that somehow supports their rage, and they just get angrier. And this is how couples sometimes throw up their hands and go, I can't talk to you, starts building walls and history like that. So
Is that why it's not good to tell your spouse just get over yourself or calm down?
yeah. Does that help you? It doesn't help anybody.
No.
Just calm down. Well, if I
Just
could
calm
just
down.
calm down, I would. You're not helping me. All you're doing is telling me the message there is, I don't want to hear it. The message is it's upsetting me, and so stop it. You see what I'm getting at? The message is, and it'll again, with an adult, you'd say, hey, just hear me out. But little children, for instance, they're not going to turn to their mom when they're 7 years old. Mom interrupts them and starts lecturing them about something. A 7-year-old's not going to turn to their mom and say, Mom, will you just shut up and listen? I mean, they're not going to do that. They'll just sit there and listen and listen. And And mom thinks, or dad, thinks, oh, we got it nailed. He understands now. Child understands. Until something similar happens later, and they're just as upset as they were the time before. I thought we talked about this. No, you didn't. All right. So, so how do you empty somebody out? That's what I want to talk about. I'm trying to get right to it. Well, the thing to understand is that we know when we're filled up, we have phrases that describe it. I've had it up to here. The straw that broke the camel's back. So the person is aware when they're filled up and they need to be emptied out. What the soothing presence who's emptying them out, who's okay when they're not, the other person's not, needs to understand is that they need to be emptied out on 3 different levels. And this is where this is the thing I want to emphasize the most. All right. 3 levels. The most superficial level is the here and now. Right. And we have lots of words to describe the here and now. And I'll give you a silly example that I use. You didn't take out the garbage. Well, we have lots of words to describe why you should take out the garbage. Right. The logic is, hey, it's your job. It's beginning to smell, all the things that we can say. Fine. But what happens to the next deeper level, which is I call the history level? History level. Well, the example extends because this is the 6th time I've asked you to take out the garbage and you haven't done it. Now, obviously, the reaction to the 6th time is going to be a lot more intense than to the first time. But if you didn't know the history, you'd look at that person from the outside and go, what's the big deal? So they didn't take out the garbage. You see, the logic begins to break down. But people stick to that logic and they're missing the boat. That's the point. The deepest level is what I call the tapped into level. These are my terms. They're in the book that, we've talked about the first time. What is that? The tapped into level is this. The fact that you didn't take out the garbage after I asked you 6 times means you don't listen to me. I hate when people don't listen to me. My brother and sister never listened to me. I hated when they did. This one can go anywhere, based on your own experience. The kicker here is that most of the intensity of people's reactions are not on level 1, the superficial logical level. It's coming from the history level, like, here we go again. And the deepest level, you're really hurting my feelings and you're making me really mad. All right. But most people try to argue on level 1, just saying you shouldn't feel that way because of X, Y, and Z. But the person's filled up with all from level, the history level and tapped into level, and they don't hear it. Okay. So how do you empty them out? Well, the logical level is easy. We have lots of words to describe that. How do you know how to empty out somebody on the history level? Well, sometimes they'll let you know. They'll go say things like, you always do this. Well, you never do that. Well, now they're emptying out on previous experiences. That's the history level. That's here we go again. That needs to be emptied out. And we'll talk about how the person can do it in a second. The deepest level is when they get to it, if they can get past the logic, etc., is to say, hey, you're making me feel like this, and I didn't like it when it happened to me before. This predates our marriage. My kids do the same thing to me, and I can't stand when they do. This one can go anywhere. Mm-hmm. You need to be aware, the soothing presence person, the emptying out person, needs to be aware of these 3 levels because they all have to be emptied out if the person's then going to be able to hear whatever explanation you have. All right. So you be the soothing presence, person says, this is what's going on. That's really upsetting me. Okay. Let's basically get it off their chest. And one of the questions they can ask, because, if they don't hear, you always do this, or you never do that, is to simply ask, has that happened before? Have I done that before? Now, you have to understand it's a soothing presence. And if it's about somebody else, you can just go right to this. If it's about you are doing this to me, well, the natural response is to get defensive and logical. And what I'm saying is don't do that. I'm saying, okay, my guess is, the phrase is, my guess is I've done something that's really made you feel this way about me. Tell me about it. This is a very therapeutic way of approaching it because you're already admitting that you did something. You may not have meant to. You may have been just tapping into history or what's, tapped into level of things. But that is good because then the person who's trying to empty out doesn't have to defend their perceptions because you're already saying you did something. Okay. If they don't get in, you can even ask. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I think
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, James here, James Moffitt. I wanted to let you know about our current sponsors. These people sponsor the podcast financially and help to underwrite the cost of producing this podcast. And I want to say thank you to them. So Michael Evan Blair is with whenindoubt.spinitout.com. Richard Jones is with secondstarts.com. Addiction Recovery Program. Jonathan Nall, he's the author of Final Approach or finalapproach.com. Kenny Dupar, author of Scoundrels in Iraq. Scott Yamamura, author of Financial Epiphany. Mary Toko is a vocal advocate for vaccine education and parental rights. Andrew Ryan Profashi is a cult and cancer survivor and the author of The War on Love. Melissa Crook is a podcast guest, and she is the insightful and compassionate host of the FEEL, that's F.E.E.L podcast. All right. Thank you for listening to this. And now back to your feature presentation. So I can edit this out, but when you're tapping your desk, your microphone's picking it up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
My bad.
Just try to not tap the desk because I'm hearing don't. It's all right.
Then I won't sing either. How's that? Is that okay with you too?
No, you can sing all you want because at least we know that's what you're trying to do.
Well, I'm going to let you know that I have a CD out of Irish music, and I have won 4 awards for my singing in musical theater. So I actually can sing. You're going to edit that out too, but anyway.
Yeah. It didn't pause because we're live streaming. I'll edit all this out. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go get back to where you were.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if the person doesn't actually volunteer the history level, for instance, you can say, have I done it before? Has that happened before? All right. Yes, it has. And let them empty out. Your job on all these levels as a soothing presence is to mirror back what you hear. Don't sum up. Don't interrupt. Just mirror back what you hear. Mirroring is exactly that. You just repeat back, maintaining eye contact, maintaining your cool. Don't get defensive. And that's being the soothing presence. Okay. When I do that, what is it like for you? That's the third level. It makes me feel like this. It makes me feel like that. It reminds me of this. It reminds me of that. All those levels need to be emptied out and mirrored back to the person. That's the emptying out process. The difference between this and catharsis is these 3 levels, okay? Being aware of the 3 levels helps the person who's doing the emptying out, the soothing presence, to be aware this is what they need to go through all of those 3 levels and not interrupt, all right? At the end of it, the person who's the soothing presence repeats back what they've heard on all 3 levels and say, is that close? Am I getting it? Yes, you are. Thank you. The thing that I may have mentioned on our first podcast, when somebody feels truly heard and understood, that gives them the hope that things can be better. That's what you're doing. That's why it's so therapeutic. And now the person's emptied out. And now is the soothing presence, if it's addressed against them, not against them, but a problem with them, they can say, the first thing they do is honor the perception. They say, based on how you see it, no wonder you feel the way you do. Now notice the qualifier, based on how you see it. Now it's the person, now is the time to say, I see it differently. I don't blame you for seeing it your way, but this is how I see it. And then they're emptied out. They can now hear any sort of explanation you give. I didn't mean to do that. I appreciate you telling me that. This is what was going on. So that's why I did what I did. And this creates the dialogue without the defensiveness. Couples need to be able to do this for one another. You hear the phrase opposites attract. In some ways, that's an advantage because what really bothers one person won't bother the other and they can soothe one another. And I'm simply going through the process of what it requires to take somebody who's filled up and empty them out. All right. Now, we're talking obviously about adults because when we talked, I think the first time we talked about how children have to develop the capacity to do what I just said, to develop the emotional language, to deal with the intensity, all these things the parent can do for young children being a soothing presence. They just might have to take guesses and do play therapy, play with the child because the child to deal with their intensity. There's a whole other, it's another, that's a whole other field is dealing with the children because you got to account for their capacities and their, level of development. All right. So what we're talking about, because, in the short time that we have here, is if you're dealing with an adult who already has an emotional language and can tolerate feelings and things like that. All right. But this is the emptying out process. And if couples can become aware of that, then they can really talk to one another. They can both be soothing presence for one another. And that's going to translate to the kids because the children are going to see this and they're going to say, this is how you deal with intense emotion. You don't go off half cocked. You don't try to deny it. You don't try to make light of it. You don't try to change the subject. You see what I mean? One of the biggest mistakes that parents make, and I'm going to call it a mistake, because it's so common, is they try to make their children, quote unquote, make them feel better. Now, how odd is this hearing from a child psychologist to say, don't try to make your child feel better? Because when parents do, is they'll try to relate it to their own experience. They'll say, don't worry about it, or just do this and you feel all better. That's, this is the typical ways people try to make their child feel better. All they're doing is cutting off this emptying out process. That's all they're doing. Then where's the child going to go? Mom told me what I should do. Where am I going to go? You see, in a way, it almost makes it unsafe because the child then builds up their own history of perceptions of the parent and says, if I tell mom this, she's going to just tell me what to do, or she's just going to try to make a joke out of it, or she's going to get really mad at me, and, then it's not safe. Then the child is not going to talk to their parents. You see, so this is the child part of being a soothing presence. How to soothe people differs. You soothe an infant by holding them and cooing to them, and the rumble of your chest, the warmth of your body. As children get older, you start using words. Younger children may need you to take guesses about how they feel, so they can just go because it's a lot easier for them to say than try to explain their feelings because they don't have the language yet. As they get older, fine. Teenagers, that's another kettle of fish because they have a, great sense of privacy and they don't want you to know a lot of the things that they're doing, basically. And so,
Right.
But if you develop this soothing presence, the child can learn, internalize the soothing presence, and they can now soothe themselves. And then in children, the term for that is called resilience. The child is resilient. In adults, it's called stress tolerance. And we know that part of maturation is somebody who can tolerate stress and deal with it successfully. You see, if you never have those experiences and don't develop the emotional language and you still feel things intensely and they're all inside, well, then we have a much different situation because, a 5-year-old will throw a tantrum because they don't have the language and they're feeling things intensely. We deal with that. If the same thing happens in a 17-year-old, that could be jail time. I mean, you have to develop this capacity. When we see people who sort of go off half-cocked, that's the term we use, we call them immature because they are. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm looking at the time. You said about 20 minutes.
No, it's okay.
So. Are we
We
good?
can go.
Are we good?
We can go between 20 and 30 minutes. That's fine. I don't want to go over 30.
No, okay. But do you have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask
Well,
me?
yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking that and I may be wrong, so correct me, but you're talking a lot about emotional intelligence, right? And people being aware of what's going on inside of their head and their emotions, right? And I was sitting here thinking, like we talked before I hit the record button, my parents were not a soothing presence at all, ever. And so I never really wanted to tell them anything. And of course there were the lectures, there were the spankings, the beatings, blah, 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 the yelling, the screaming. And so I learned at a young age, don't make dad mad, stay under the radar and don't get on his crosshairs, don't do what he told you not to do. Right. Because you knew that you were going to incur his wrath or whatever.
Yes.
And so anyway, I probably had to heal from a lot of that as I grew up and became an adult myself and had children of my own. And this emptying out process, the 3 different levels that you talk about, which I want you to outline that again before we get off of here. But I'm thinking that men in general are probably not real good at being in touch with what's going on inside, because I was raised, in the 70s and 80s and men don't cry, men don't get emotional, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so we were not encouraged to talk about emotions. We were not encouraged to talk about what had us upset, or, we were taught to bottle all that stress up inside us and to not let it out, because that's not what men do. Right. And we think about John Wayne and, all the
Marlboro Man.
What's a real man, and so
Yeah.
now
Macho. Yeah.
fast forward to now, we have a little more emotional intelligence, and we know that it's okay to go to therapy. We know it's okay to talk to folks like you that have all this knowledge, and we understand why it's important in relationships, especially husbands and wives. We need to understand what our spouse's love language is. We need to know how to not say, just when they get upset, never say calm down, because that's just going to make it 3 times worse.
Yeah.
You'll be in
or say that's ridiculous. That's poison. That's poison, by the way. But go ahead.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right. No, that's fine. I'm just kind of reflecting on what you're saying and how I kind of internalize it myself. And I wish I could have talked to you 30 years ago, but
I've gotten that reaction from many men, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's cultural, like you're saying. It's also can be familial. The British stiff upper lip. It can just be, again, your father was probably brought up the same way.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
He was one child out of many. I think his dad died when he was a young boy. I think he had pneumonia. My dad was born in the 40s, right? And so I have no clue where healthcare was in the 40s. But anyway, his dad passed away from pneumonia. And so his mother raised, I don't know, 6 or 7 children by herself, right? And times were tough, right? And so I don't think he was the oldest child. I don't know where he was at in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, yeah, he probably had a not a real easy childhood.
Well, again, we began this talk by saying people typically parent the way they were parented. And what I try to do, and this is a term I use, I try to tweak what you already know. Most parents who come in to see me, their child is acting up or something like that, or they're having marital problems, etc. They're totally afraid that Dr. Marcus is going to say, you're really messing up. I never go there because, I say, hey, all we're going to do is refine what you're already doing. All right. I'm going to do the brief synopsis that you asked me to do.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Okay. We get filled up with intense emotion. When we're filled up, we focus inwardly to deal with the intensity and the chaos that's going on inside of us. Therefore, we're not focused outwardly on what people are trying to say to us. So we're kind of blind to what they're saying. And what we typically do pick up is whatever they say that sort of supports how we're feeling. And so people get really confused when they're trying to explain logically, hey, this is not something you need to be so upset about, or, don't be so mad about this or whatever, because the person's not hearing it and they give up. They say, oh, I can't talk to you, which begins a history of not being able to talk to somebody because it's not safe to. The soothing presence is a person who can tolerate a lot of this stuff, but also empty out people on the 3 levels that I'm going to briefly do a synopsis of right now. All right?
Okay.
Again, the soothing presence is somebody who's okay when you're not. The most superficial level, and the one we have the most words for, is the logical here and now level. I'm not going to go through the same examples. We have lots of words to describe that, and most people end up staying on that level because it's logical. But meanwhile, most of the energy and intensity of the emotions that are present come from the 2 deeper levels. One is the history level. Like I said, here we go again, because it's happened before. And then the tapped into level. When you do that, it makes me feel like X, Y, and Z. If a person's going to hear whatever you have to say as far as an explanation of what's going on, they have to be emptied out of on all 3 levels, or they won't hear you, right? And with spouses, sometimes they have to take turns, and I said that, the first person who's the soothing presence at the end says, this is what I hear you saying. I don't blame you for feeling the way you do. I may see it differently. Okay, based on how you see it, you feel that way. I may see it differently. But now that person's emptied out, and they also have the hope that things can be better because they feel truly heard and understood. Now it's the soothing presence switches the roles. This is why opposites attract, like I said earlier. Okay, now the other person needs to take on the role of the soothing presence and empty out the first person. Same thing, 3 levels. At the end, okay, we understand, we're emptied out now, we understand where each other's coming from, that it's only partly about what you did or what I did, and a lot of what's being tapped into in the history and in our previous emotions. So Now we get to the constructive part, which is basically what can we do about it? Now, the we is important. It's a merger. We're in it together. It's not what you are going to do about it. Like you're the reason we're having a fight. No, it's what can we do about it to make it better? But now you're both emptied out. You both feel heard and understood. So that the hope of things can be better. Okay, this is good. It also helps people understand. This is what I help people to understand. When I talk to parents about internalized responses, and that's where they go when they get stressed. So they have to realize their own history, saying, oh, I always had it like you. I always had to shut up, because out of fear. So that's where I go when I get stressed. That's where I regress to. If you happen to be married to somebody where they regress is, we have to talk about it right now, then you got a problem because they think you're saying, hey, I don't want to talk about it. Wait a minute. I need to talk about it right now. Well, I can't talk about it right now. You can see, but if they understand where each other regresses to, they can say, oh, I understand where you're coming from. You may need a little time. Oh, I understand you really want to talk about it right now. Let's set up a time in 20 minutes. It's a much different conversation. They're not perceiving each other as being oppositional or whatever you want to call it, like they don't want to. So that's a synopsis. Yeah.
Basically, what I'm hearing from you is that each side needs to feel validated. Their feelings need to be validated. Yep.
Yes, but they have to be expressed first.
Right.
We're talking about the communication about it. You can't just turn to somebody and say, oh, I don't blame you for feeling what, if they haven't even explained it, you say, oh, yeah, I'm sure you feel irate. Let's think about what we can do about it. No, that's not validating their feelings. What validates their feeling is being truly heard and understood. That's what's validating their feelings. All right. You can't shortchange this process. By simply saying, it's like a parent turning to their kids saying, oh, you can always talk to me. No, it's based on a history of, what the parents, when they've tried to talk to their parents before. It's almost a foolish thing, to say that if you think about it. You can always talk to me. Well, not if you're going to make fun of me, not if you're going to redirect me, not if you're going to get angry, not if you're going to get defensive, not if you're going to explain things all logically and not let me talk. Guess what? I can't talk to you. You see, and these are assumptions people make just by saying, oh, you can always talk to me. No. And again, the adult version of this is, if somebody did it to you, would it be helpful? No. You tell them to just hear me out, or find somebody who'll listen to you. So, these are the assumptions people make in relationships, and they build up this history of not being able to talk to one another. And then we get into, oh, here we go again. If I try to talk to my dad, he's just going to get mad at me and maybe punish me. It's not safe. You just keep it inside. You internalize it, and then you have to find somebody who can help you with it.
This is good stuff. I appreciate you sharing this with us and with the listening audience. Sure. Thank you for being here, Dr. Marcus. And I'm sure we will do some more of these as time goes on, and some short videos that'll be bite-sized videos that people can sink their teeth into or listen to as they're going about their.
Let me plug the book because that's what we're here for.
Ahead.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Hold on. I always have to look up the title because it's too long for me to remember. So give me a second. It seems silly, but it's the truth. All right.
I get it.
All right.
I have days I can't remember my own name sometimes.
Hey, I'm getting old too. What can I tell you? All right. Parent RX is the title of the book, subtitle, Prescriptive Wisdom, Tips and Strategies for Communication with Your Child. That's the title of the book. That's the working title right now. The book is, forthcoming. It's not out yet. We're just trying to get it done. But, they can visit my website and get a lot of this information from this podcast and other ones that I've done with you and other people. That is, parentrx.org. One word, ParentRx, like prescription, parentrx.org. And they can go to the website and see what, I've been saying to other people, etc.
Very good. Well, parentrx.org is pretty easy to remember, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So to the listening audience, I'll say thank you for the privilege of your time. You can listen to this podcast on Captivate.fm, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Public Radio. You can watch the video episode on rumble.com. That's rumble.com. Our website is located at parentingadultchildren.org. Common spelling, parentingadultchildren.org. On the website, you can get my contact information. You can send me an email, leave me a voicemail, and I'll get back with you. You see in the blog section, you'll see the upcoming show schedule. I put 2 months worth of episodes there for you to see. And there's a place to leave a review for the podcast episode. Now, a lot of people listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts because I guess everybody has an iPhone or an iPad, or a lot of people do. And so a lot of people use Apple Podcasts. And if you're listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, there's a place right there on your smart device where you just click and leave a review while you're listening to it. right? So please do that. New episodes are released every Friday morning at 8 a.m. And thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And stay tuned to more episodes in the very near future. And thanks again, Dr. Marcus.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Please tune in next week for another episode of our podcast on parenting adult children.